in Argentina. And the thing that sucks about it is that he was told he had like a 20 or 30-minute talk, and then there was a strike organized or something. And so they asked him to um, cut his
Hmm.
cut his cut his comments to 10 minutes, which he was very put out about. He said if I knew it was only going to be 10 minutes, uh, I probably wouldn't have booked the flight to go down there in the first place. I would have just been like, it's not even worth it. Um, and I probably would have done the same thing in his place. It kind of sucks. But yeah, long story short, he's not going to be with us on. Um,
Imagine trying to give a lecture from the plane.
yeah, if you could do me a favor and help me, um, like I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out. I'm just going to kind of follow the pattern that we established this last Saturday. And if I,
Hmm.
well, I'll probably need some assistance in like maybe putting text on the screen or to read from. I don't know if your copy is still the incomplete one or if we can fix that.
Once
You
cut
know,
off.
yeah, or maybe we can figure out stack duties because I'd really like to establish a system to where people can start feeling free to get on stack. Um, Trotskyist sect style instead of just sitting there mute while we talk at them. Because this last time only a certain number of people talked. Um, and we want to expand that, even if it's just general comments per paragraph or something. I don't know.
Also, they love capitalism, most economic diverse system. I just ordered something shipped via FedEx. It went farther away from me before it's going to become closer to me. It's because of
Wait,
how hubs work, I guess.
wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, I have a package that's moving away from me before it moves closer to me.
Oh yeah, I've had those before. Those are no fun. I've actually had them at my post office, and then it moved away, and then it moved out of state, and then it was lost.
Hmm.
I was like,
No, mine's just a system designed that way, though, I think.
yeah,
I think I'm halfway between two hubs, and it just went to the closer one, which is less efficient, but whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, just like the airlines.
Yes.
Got lucky with one of my connecting flights by
Those bastards. uh and every year the seat room gets smaller until they've actually shown um like concept layouts where they wondered if they could get more people on board by having everybody stand. And I'm like, on an airplane? Like even when I was in the military, they wanted you strapped in, okay? Even if it was just general like this maneuvers, right? Because if something went wrong, I mean, you go flying, okay? And it's not like the kind of a momentum you're working with in a car. It's like 3 times that at least. And it does not have inertial dampeners. So
Look at my one of my flights. We was like it was so I guess not as big of a flight. It only cost me $50 for me and my friend to get upgraded. But it's like
nice. That's good.
yeah, but it's like the fact that the chargers they have to yeah.
Yeah. No, totally.
Okay.
So
So
we are getting into, and I'm shamelessly using Harris's text at this point because I've totally lost the plot in the science of logic again. Not that I haven't read through these sections already, especially with Alex. So I've read them. It's just been a minute, but I've been following more Harris's guide than anything else to get through some of these parts. And we're going into the syllogism of reflection. And it's funny because the syllogism of reflection is what we get when you realize that the qualitative syllogism and its movement have proven that have proven that the let me just read from this because I can't paraphrase it yet. So if you don't mind, so he says. As the three moments of the concept have thus become interchangeable, their differences are aufgehoben and they have become mutually equal. The result is the the quantitative syllogism. Okay, so we went from qualitative to quantitative, I guess.
Because
Things
they're-
which are equal to the same thing are equal to one another, which sounds like a mathematical law that I've heard dozens of times, actually. This, says Hegel, is regarded as an axiom in mathematics, but it is really a logical principle demonstrable through dialectical derivation from the concept, as are all other so-called axioms. This seems to be a key phrase because, you know, any of these so-called axioms can be traced back to how they work and what their constituents are in and of themselves, but they aren't usually given that way in a mathematical text, especially today. So Hegel demonstrates in an entirely different way what Frege and Russell have claimed to do, that mathematics is deductible in its entirety from pure logic, which it is. This is where having the Harris text really pays off because he connects it to everyday shit. You know, it isn't some mystical whatever. It actually connects to all the stuff that we're familiar with, which is just great.
Plus, he is more modern, so he has a lot more to react
Yeah.
to.
Okay. Then he goes on to say this array of figures of the syllogism and the inferences they set out are circular and they reduce the moments to equality one with another, bringing about what is really the collapse of the immediate or qualitative syllogism. So the qualitative syllogism in its action collapses. Why? Right? This is because the exposition of the self-differentiation of the concrete universal establishes the whole in every part. So it develops further in the reflective syllogism, in which the individuality developed through particularity to universality is set out explicitly as the reflection into its other. The individual into the universal and the universal into the individual. In the immediate syllogism, and this is the key, the terms at first pose as separate and abstract, but they proved themselves through their very relatedness in the syllogism as it proceeded through the dialectic of its figures to be mutually implicated. This mutual implication now shows itself explicitly in the syllogism of reflection, in which the individual is treated at once as the particularization of the universal. So what this means is that instead of going through individual, particular as the middle term and universal as the far extreme, we develop the second figure, which is with the individual as the mediating term, starting with the universal and coming up with a particular. So UIP. The thing, but before I go on to talk about reflection, I just want to talk about Russell and hang on just a second, sorry. There's a paragraph near the beginning. And it's really interesting to me because, well, the two connect together. So right up to the present day, this is on page 7. Okay. I may have read this last time. I don't remember. I can't remember exactly. Right up to the present day, formal logicians have claimed that logic makes and can make no metaphysical assumptions, and that it is wholly independent of metaphysics. Any and every metaphysics must bow to its authority, and sound logic is held to be compatible with a variety of metaphysical doctrines, so long as each is internally self-consistent. It's very pragmatic. If you think about it, any old system will do as long as you follow the logical operators, right? Yet, even in quite recent times, at least two very eminent mathematical logicians have set out a metaphysical doctrine which they declare logic, the only sort of logic they recognize as legitimate, must reflect. Bertrand Russell propounded a theory of metaphysical pluralism, which he called logical atomism, according to which propositions reflect facts which are mutually independent and atomic. Okay. In Principia Mathematica, it is expressly stated that the language and procedure of logic presupposes the atomicity of facts. Okay. Everything hangs separately, in other words. Wittgenstein in his TLP, which is the Logico Philosophicus, right, declare that the world divides into facts, any one of which may be the case or may not be the case without making any difference to the rest. Nothing is related. Again, everything hangs separately. These mutually indifferent atomic facts can be stated in similarly atomic propositions which show forth their form. Hegel, in this section of the syllogism, when you come to the end of the qualitative syllogism, shows that those propositions are pretty silly, you know. I don't know the particulars. I haven't read Russell or Wittgenstein. Eventually, I probably will have to, so that I could write a paper showing how they're ridiculous, at least in Hegelian terms. But it just sort of gives me a warm glow inside to see that their fundamental principles. Hegel didn't even have to get that far in proving the syllogism as a full unit. You only get to the end of the qualitative one before he basically dethrones Russell or Frege or Wittgenstein, right?
I think the early, more the early Wittgenstein.
Before they're even born. Okay. It's just like, you know. Okay,
Well,
I'm gonna stop talking and
it's more the
what do
early
you guys think?
Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
Later Wittgenstein, I think, actually comes closer to Hegel, except I don't think he ever read Hegel, so he didn't realize it.
Mm. Well, it just occurs to me that anyone opening those sections would, if they followed it correctly, come to the same conclusion, right? But I've also read somewhere that I don't think Russell has actually read Hegel. It's the same thing with Popper. Didn't read Hegel, read someone else's, probably Schelling's or Schopenhauer's critique or Kierkegaard's of Hegel and just went with that, right?
Well, Russell claimed to have read Hegel. I mean, in the history of Western philosophy chapter in Hegel, he claims to have read the Science of Logic. So,
oh, he did.
So he said.
Oh, okay. Or
and
he tried, or he tried to.
He was an undergraduate and graduate student at Cambridge. That was the dominant philosophy. Neo-Hegelianism was dominant at that time, and that's
Yeah, but yeah,
rebelled against.
Sure, but it was Anglo philosophy, and so I wonder how far into the logic they really went, or if they just went with the phenomenology.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the English Hegelians had their own special takes on Hegel.
Yeah, they did.
has been pointed out, but is some pretty direct continuities between English neo-Hegelianism and analytical philosophy.
Yes.
Not so it's not so much not so different.
Yeah. And that's probably from Hume's lasting influence,
Yeah,
not to mention Locke.
yeah.
Both figures I really should read and never have, and I suck.
I mean, they never went away, and Rousseau, of course, was a great admirer of both Locke and Hume.
Yeah, and that would totally figure actually. So what's your take, Kyle? Sound pretty good?
Yeah, I did like also on some of this section. Trying to think. I was trying to remember. It was interesting is at least seeing how the two options do end up having to externally reflect each other in that aspect.
Yeah.
Because I guess because again it is again the concept having in order to define its self more objectively is having to yet again go through the cycle of the logic that had to before in a microcosm.
Yeah.
And so yeah. No, not for this chapter yet. But...
Oh, you're fine. So I'm going to jump right into it. The syllogism of reflection. Let's see. The individual and the universal reflect one into the other in the inductive syllogism, which develops through three stages: allness or complete enumeration, induction or incomplete enumeration, and analogy. And so the first one's a list. So I like to compare this to Marx's development of the commodity and how when you're developing a commodity list to a single universal commodity, you can come up with what he terms the price list. So S1 is P, S2 is P, S3 is P, so on and so forth. If you think of the contents of a library and just say that every book in this library is under this classification, you kind of get a flavor of it. Or if all the books now in this room were published in Britain, yeah, then all of them are P, right? And you have S1 book 1, S2 book 2, that kind of thing. Yeah. So with this let's see. So you have perfect induction, which I just talked about, or complete enumeration when it is possible will give us what we require. So in practical work, okay, the lesser syllogisms along the list have practical uses in reasoning, right? So the perfect induction, this immediate stage, I guess, of the syllogism of reflection, gives us the ability to create either a price list, like with Marx, or a categorization list of books or other items. When it is possible, will give us what we require, but then the conclusion is included in the major premise, and the first figure commits petitio principii. S1 must blah, blah, blah. Okay. The judgment of allness in consequence is itself immediate. That is to say, it is as contingent as any of the premises, even though we have exhausted the class, because the conjunction may still be merely accidental. So at this stage, with the perfect induction, it still could be accidental, right? Yeah. So if all the books now in this room were published in Britain, it does not necessarily follow that any book found in this room at any time will have been published in Britain, and to select one of those which was originally included in the enumeration is merely to repeat what we already know. In most cases, however, and in those of greatest interest and importance, it is not practicable to examine all possible examples. Okay. So we're getting more to the grains of sand on the beach, right? And estimates, right? If we then conclude universally from a number of favorable cases, the induction is incomplete and the risk is run of too hasty a conclusion from too few examples, right? Moreover, we have no firm criterion by which to decide how many observations will be enough. An example, and this is pretty common, is gold is a metal and conducts electricity. Silver is a metal and conducts electricity. Iron is a metal and conducts electricity. And then the conclusion reads, all metals tested conduct electricity. The individual, as frequently observed, serves as the middle term to unite the universal with the particular. And so the inductive syllogism falls under the second figure UIP. The individual is taken concretely, not merely as immediately presented in abstract, but as an instance of the universal, so that when we have examined a number of examples, we feel entitled to conclude that the particular under investigation, connectivity in this case, belongs to the universal or proximate genus. From this, we proceed to copper is a metal, therefore copper conducts electricity. But copper may not have been tested and might, for all we can tell, be an exception. That's always a possibility. Accordingly, we are thrown back upon analogy, which argues that if a certain substantial number of instances have a certain property, others like them as yet unexamined will probably also have that property. This gives partial justification to the above conclusion about copper. Now, I'm not going to read all of this about analogy, but suffice it to say that if you've ever taken an analogy test in high school or college, there was actually a section in the SAT and later in one of the standardized tests that I took, I forget which one, that had a big section on an analogy. And this is a big part of reasoning tests in the academy, which I found very interesting, considering that Hegel does not consider it to be a foolproof form of reasoning. You know, there are things that can fall outside of it. And I always kind of felt that when going through it, like isn't there stuff that could fall outside of these criteria? And I was always told, the testing answer, select the answer that feels the closest as opposed to the exact one, right? I always found that to be, I was always rather dismayed by that answer. I'll shut up.
Exams to this point are still like that.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, they are.
I was trying to think, kind of trying to find the exact area. I don't know where I read it, but basically, in example, if in relation to where I do think Harris probably is where it was, because it's a little more specific, while Hegel is a much more because it's being more trying to be more exact. That's in the syllogism of quality, we're kind of existence, we're kind of just going through and seeing, hey, there just ought to be this sort of a connection of where there's this kind of universal is kind of there, where it ought to be kind of, some sort of connection, some sort of, actual tying the two together. So in the syllogism of, well, what is it? Reflection. Okay, that's what it was. It's more of a obvious attempt where the universal itself is actually more tying the extremes together in some fashion, but it's doing so externally. So it is a further development of that connection, but it's not complete yet.
Yeah. And one of the examples Harris gives, without reading the whole paragraph, is life on Earth, life on another planet. And how many conjunctions are there supposed to be before you actually have like 100%, the conditions for life, right? And even in our best models, it's never 100% because, you've got the Goldilocks zone, you have a heavenly body, a planet, right? it has this and this and this and this thing about it. And from the analogy, you can easily draw the conclusion that the moon will not have life on it, but we will, given the correct conjunction. But the conjunction is not complete because it's based on the information that we have gathered, right? And so it's more suitable than earlier forms of the syllogism in terms of a scientific, like a step up to a scientific hypothesis, right? About whatever you're looking at. In this case, life on a planet.
I do find it funny. That is a reference to the faulty analogy Hegel uses in his Science of Logic. Or, oh, hey, based off this analogy, the moon must also be alive because it's a heavenly body.
Right.
No, but yeah, I guess the part I forgot to highlight here. It says here, then the middle term is an individual, but an individual taken in its universal nature.
Yes.
So in that sense, that I think I called this out the first time we read through this. It's like via logic. It first starts out like in the quality section, we're going through where the middle term is more finite, right? Which makes sense. It's immediate. Now we look back on it. And now, so the next one is kind of a spurious infinity that's heading that we're again seeing here, but starting to tighten up.
Yeah.
Eventually, we'll get to a true infinity where everything references itself in the next.
But also in this instance, the individual is no longer looked at just as singular, but almost as a representative of a class of books, planets, Goldilocks zone, nitrogen atmosphere, oxygen atmosphere, so on and so forth. And then, yeah,
the exact term is, I think he uses genus.
Yes. I am horrible on my scientific terminology. I need to go back through like a scientific dictionary and be like, okay, this is species, this is genus, because I've been exposed to all this, but it's been like 30 years since I've been in a classroom talking about any of this stuff. At least, right?
Yeah.
It's rather embarrassing. I need to get current again.
I'm used to it in a specific like life definition way, and not the more abstract way or the broader definition.
So if either of you guys know of a good book, just a general book with some scientific terms, I mean, I know I can look them up on Google, but I'm 45 and my brain still works on printed books. So if you can think of any offline, just hook me up with a link or something. If not, that's cool too.
I'll take a look, because I know DK Books has the called the science book, because they have the blank book that goes through historical derivations of concepts. That might be, you can find that at any like regular bookstore at this point, or maybe online. But yeah, I'll take a look at my copy.
Thanks, because at this point it probably would help me to just go back through some of that stuff, because especially heading into the philosophy of nature, which we're about to do, I'm guessing he references an awful lot of scientific terminology that is probably still current today, in general, genus, species, the whole bit.
There's a whole section on weather. I'm going to probably be the best person for that.
Oh, man, I can't wait to get to that part to hear your dissertation on how wrong he is. I mean, not how wrong he is, but you know what I mean. Just
probably just incomplete.
Yeah, it's been like over 200 years. So
meteorology as its own field, I think, was just barely starting to exist at this time.
Yeah, you know what? You know what's funny? I'm reading a book called The Darkening Age, and it is it's about the Christian destruction of the classical world. And and it's by I
saw your post, that's why.
Yeah, it's by someone who writes for the Times, I guess. And she was a classics teacher, and I actually know someone who was in her class as a fellow student for like 4 years when they went to Cambridge together, I guess. He didn't really know her that well, but she was in class. But why did I bring this up? Shit. That's how my brain's working today. In the book, she talks about how the Greco-Roman philosophers already had um, some very sophisticated scientific models and workings out of how weather works. Like there was a book, okay? It was destroyed along with so much else. There was an entire school of thought called the atomists, and you can read about them today in sketch form, but most of what they consisted of has been lost because the early Christians burned all the books. Like what we have today from the ancient world is like 1 or 2% of what there actually was. And what there was much more sophisticated than is usually given credit, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons that when they found certain ancient texts through the Arabs preserved it because, you know, they weren't they weren't nuts. Okay. It's like it it's like Europe pushed the reset button on us. Okay. We got up to a certain point. And even if our technology was basically just rural with you know with a city sheen on most of it was actually very serviceable. And the fact that they got up to an atomic theory, like a real atomic theory that was no shit. I mean, it sounds exactly like what we deal with today. And in fact, Einstein and Newton were people who looked at that and took it seriously and used it in their models. Okay. That's why we have what we have today in a more sophisticated form. Fucking Christians burnt it all. It's all gone, you know, or they did the thing where they erased text off of a papyrus and then um, wrote their Bibles on it.
Yeah, certain books survive apparently by accident, like Lucretius's book, you know, on the nature of things. There was only one copy left in all of Europe, and it was in like an obscure monastery in northern Italy. And some collector saw what they had, and he bought the book, and later was republished.
Beautiful.
It
Beautiful.
was just one copy left in all of probably the whole world even.
You know what? I
Some monastery, for whatever reason, had decided to preserve it,
Yeah,
where nobody else had bothered to do that.
I bet you I'll bet you $100 that if someone went through Rome's papal archives, the Catholic Church archives, and scanned every one of the books with some of the techniques that we've perfected recently, we could probably recover older texts that were erased off of the paper that the newer books were written on. I guarantee you'd find just at least one. You know what I mean? Like, I forget where it was. It was either in Egypt or some part of Iraq, but um, they found like, they found a ruined book and they were able to scan it and then read it with lasers and shit. It was in the news in the last 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
Or 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 maybe it was Vesuvius. Like they found a library under all the ash and crap uh from no, that's it wasn't Vesuvius, it was the other one. What was the big disaster in the ancient world? the volcano.
Well, that was Vesuvius in Pompeii.
Yeah, Pompeii. Yeah, yeah, it was Pompeii. Okay, now I remember. Okay, great. So, sorry if I'm taking a little detour there. Uh,
Time.
I'm just finding a lot of this very, very fascinating. I didn't necessarily get up to the
Syllogism.
syllogism of necessity, but I had the feeling that sort of going over these more finely is probably a better idea.
One thing I did point out, there's kind of like that Harris says here, trying to figure out exactly if that worked. This might be the initial, actually correct.
Yeah.
Reflective syllogism corresponds to reflective judgment, and so to essence, so the syllogism of necessity corresponds to judgment of necessity. But here
Yes.
we remain in doubt whether this is the sublation of and development of the categories of actuality, of substance, cause, and reciprocity, or somehow expresses the concept as the value judgment was shown to do. There is some ground for aligning this final type of syllogism both with actuality and concept. I mean, we must not forget that actuality, which is essence on the verge of becoming concept, covers the modal categories as well as those of absolute correlation. So this is the part where I think, like in the very most like bare sense of the syllogisms of the concept, are kind of happening at the same time as necessity. Like the part where being is in essence are uniting because just because it going through the process here, it necessarily is also at the same time its equivalent concept, judgment of concepts. So like the categorical is at the same time. I keep not remembering these words well. Where is there we go. Necessary. Well, it's the assertoric is categorical because you're asserting it's the category at the same, but it's more assertive because it's more objective at this level. Problematic is also hypothetical.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. This is going back to the judgment portion, not the syllogism, not the syllogism.
Right. So it's kind of saying that, well, what's the where's the correlative syllogism of the concept? What's here happening in the same time? It's his theory.
Yes.
So it makes sense that this is the base, and of course, its ultimate form, its absolute form, is the absolute syllogism, right? Yeah, the syllogism eventually becomes the absolute syllogism.
The
I'm just trying
absolute.
to connect it to yours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. I'm not exactly sure how to relate it all yet because it's all kind of a jumble in my head.
Well, he gets to the point he develops the syllogism, he hits objectivity. At that point, you have to derive everything else to get to the syllogism, absolute syllogism, right? That's
Right,
on.
right. The absolute syllogism is the whole system. It's what there is, right? So you have nature, you have humanity, which is spirit, which is a subset of nature, and then you have the logic of being, which ties it all together and also tells you about um, how how and what we think. So logic, nature, spirit, and that's all there is. There's nothing else but those, and every excuse me, and these are the three circles of circles. I guess you could say circle one, which has one, two, three, circle two, which has one, two, three, and circle three, which has one, two, three. And under those, you can derive pseudo circles. So if you get into the philosophy of right, you get into discussions of art, any subject really. You get into Marxist Capital, and I believe in either volume 2 or volume 3, you can catch Marx in an unguarded moment basically saying that his system is supposed to be a pseudo syllogism reflecting the current economic system, but it is not one of the absolute circles, right? Because if it was, it would reflect the logic of reality, and that's not actually where we're at. We're at we're at one of the sub circles under property. Okay. So if you follow, how do you do this? If you follow Hegel through philosophy of spirit to property, and then he derives off property the philosophy of right. Okay. Or just notes on a philosophy of right, because he didn't, I don't think he fully developed everything. Under philosophy of right, uh, there's a subsection on the economic system, which, you know, if you follow it through Marx, through the commodity, you get the modern pseudo circle, which is dependent on spirit, which is dependent on nature, which is all tied together by logic as the middle term, I guess you could say. Um, Actually, how would that work?
What was that again? Sorry, I just kind of lost.
No, you're fine. Um, it's slowly coming together in my head that the logic of the universe is what he wrote out in the science of logic. It governs being and it governs thought. So being as nature, thought as reflected in human spirit, uh, well, through both, really, you know. Um, and any subsections of all three are governed by the same rules, but the rules are not suspended just because you go down one of the pseudo circles. They're all governed by the same thing that reality is governed by. It's a monism, right? This is why we say monism, one reality. It's not a couple of separate realities depending on if you're black or you're white or any of this other stuff. It's, you know, it's one reality. Um, and the way you trace it down the system uh, gives you all the variables that show what the lower ones are dependent on. Does that make sense? It's kind of like saying that it's kind of like shit. I'm trying to think of a good way to put this. If you, just a simple one. You know how he says that determinate being is dependent on both being and nothing, and that both are moments, right? Um, the higher you get up on this on the spiral, the more stuff is behind it. But you get up to the point of like in philosophy of spirit, and you start to get into human interactions and relations. All of that is is backed by the logic of thought and being. Like there's nothing that's uh there's nothing about being or thought that you could bracket out when talking about today's economic system or the previous one, for instance, right? They're all governed by the same set of dialectical structure, I guess you could say. It seems like such a mundane thing to say, but I I have the feeling that what I just said would be contested by a lot of people who sort of silo off different identities, different experiences, and say that, well, we play by a different set of rules than you because you have more money, etc. And it's true. It really is true in the socioeconomic sense. Marx plotted out what happens in the capitalist economic system to people in different classes. That's why he traced them out scientifically. Um, I kind of lost my own plot, but you kind of get what I mean. Where existentially and otherwise, it's all governed by the same reality. Okay, we're at 8:45. Otherwise, And we only have one like mine.
Um,
Okay, so real quick, uh, so it looks like we're going toward the syllogism and necessity, and there's the categorical and the hypothetical syllogism.
right.
And do you have enough on these to talk about them right now, or do you think we should wait till next week?
Um, I mean, trying to think.
Because I need to reread them if I'm going to present them again. But it's like, oh, and the disjunctive. That's
Right.
right. There are three: categorical, hypothetical, and then disjunctive.
I can just briefly just what was it? Just if it helps for next week. I'm not as indefinite as I thought I was. Well, the
You're
category,
fine.
it's that's the universal that's the particular of connecting the individual to its universal. It's a objective universal. Well, now that
Yeah.
we have particular, that it is or it isn't. So it's now it's kind of what is it? Yep, I've already lost it.
You're
But
fine.
it is the cause and effect. Yeah, it's kind of the condition and conditional of that particular, right? So it's of that.
Yeah.
So
Y-
it's
Yeah, especially with the hypothetical, like in normal hypothetical phrases, you say, if this, then this happens,
right
and you can have a whole series of phrases rattling off conditions, several conditions that could be connected or might not be connected. Um,
now at that point, those are both connected to a single whole. So of course, now
yeah,
that it divides up, that you shut up in all of its possible components, and that makes itself a whole, the whole,
yeah,
which is why everything starts collapsing into objectivity
yeah.
because it's
And,
just
and it's funny because the closer you get to the end of the syllogism section, the more you realize how many of these tools are actually used in practical scientific work every day, and they don't have to be fully worked out methods of dealing with categorical information, right? We deal with notions every day with these different kind of reasonings, and it doesn't have to be the full absolute syllogism to reflect sub methods of working through whatever subject you're looking at scientifically. Um, which I find fascinating because with the reflective syllogism, he uncovered a few tools that we see Marx using in his work to sort of show that to show development. That's one word that comes up again and again with the final doctrine of the notion is that development is the like you have transition for the first one, you have reflection in the second, and then you have development in the third. And when developing good scientific reason, you know, um, you can use the whole gamut of tools, and they're in and of themselves they can be thought of as good scientific tools, but they're also sub tools of you know an absolute tool.
I mean, also something I
I'm
did
such a tool.
play around with just for the fun of it. I've been trying to think about okay, more has been evolved in later in the logic than previous. So it's like, how would you say, knowing what we know about through the first chapter of Essence, how can you use that to describe the initial state of pure being to becoming, or to determinate being? So in a way, and you look back and you realize pure nothing is literally the shine of pure being, right? It's the external reflection of itself that then collapses. It's just
Whoa, yeah. Holy shit, that's right. It is the external shine. There's nothing in there.
yeah.
Okay. All right. You're breaking my head with that. You can't do that.
And then, of course, now you realize that they are the same thing. There's
Yeah.
a sense of, what is it? It's a positing reflection. Now, it posits a becoming is positing something beyond itself at that point.
Yes. Points beyond itself.
Right. And so there are moments of that connection, and determinate being, of course, is the determinate reflection that determines what pure being was implicitly.
Yeah.
So it is literally the first determination. Is
Yeah.
determinating being.
It, I can't remember because I know he writes about it, but I remember reading somewhere that he reflects that many people have started at determinate being thinking that that's ground zero, and even that has content behind it. Um, and it's the same thing with Fichte. He started with the ego, which the ego is literally page one of the doctrine of the notion. And so if you want to see development of the doctrine of the notion in other hands, you should go read Fichte. And you should read Kant because I think he has some things to say in there about all of this. The closer you get to the end of the logic, the more other philosophers I think have had to say about it, which is why when you read the doctrine of being, there's so few who have. You literally have to go back to the ancient sources, like the Eletics, to even get a concept of being that's like, you know, um, as abstract as Hegel's. And they, for their part, uh, said that it was their absolute, which Hegel says actually it's the opposite, or it's on the other end of the spectrum from the absolute. But but the absolute generates being as an an abstracted category. So there you go. Okay. Someone really should pay us money to do this.
Well, I'm still waiting for it. If at that point, if I have to get monetized by YouTube first.
I wouldn't know the first thing about any of that stuff. If you ever figure that out, let me know.
Don't know if I even qualify. So
Yeah. Well, what I would suggest is that we read, um, for next time, I'd still like to talk about the final syllogism of necessity, even if it's just a little bit, because there's the full categorical, hypothetical, and disjunctive. And then I want to get into, um,
I think we should read the opening for objectivity. On top
yeah,
of
hang on just a second. Sorry.
no worries. It's
Uh,
6 pages long.
the hell is this thing? You get to the end of the syllogism.
Oh, good.
Because I mean, I'm reading from Harris, but I also kind of want to try to get back to the Hegel text so we can actually talk about the Hegel.
Okay.
So, all right. So yeah, let's seal up syllogism next time and have read from 705 to 710 on objectivity. We won't even get into mechanism because I'm pretty sure there's plenty to talk about where objectivity is. Um, one of the things that I figured out when we started EL and we were trying to figure out what the hell the translators meant by object or object with a hyphen, um, is what was the difference between the two. And objectivity in the universal sense is what they chose not to hyphenate. So when they talk about object or objectivity versus subjectivity, it's in the universal categorical sense. When you're talking about the object, it's the Gegenstand, which is the object of consciousness, which is a very different thing. An object of consciousness can be a singular thing from the senses. Like the commodity, I think, would be a Gegenstand, right? An object of consciousness. You know, you see it in the store, you buy it. Here's my object of consciousness, right? Um, Goes into my head, makes a picture of a cell phone and all the cell phone can do. Or maybe I know nothing about the cell phone and it's really just an empty signifier, right? It's a black, thin, boxy looking thing, which sometimes lights up when I push a button, right? Um, so yeah, I'm glad I finally sat down with Alex and hammered that out, because the first paragraph of the EL, you can't really get past it without knowing the difference. And I think we tried, but sort of didn't really get it the first time, because I kept bouncing off of it like, what the hell does he mean? There's, just to wrap this up for our audience too, there's a lot of prep work that goes into reading Hegel, even from the first sentence, folks. Okay. You can open this up and read it from cover to cover. And if you have some limited background, especially having read Marx, and see some of the similar terrain that he goes over in his work, you can make out the rocks under your feet. But without a good philosophical education going in, or at least a lot of preparation, it takes a lot longer. One of the things I found helpful in reading Hegel was reading the Green Book. Houlgate's The Opening of Hegel's Logic, and he only goes through chapters 1 and 2. Okay, but still, he gives you all of this, which covers the introductory material that Hegel gives you before starting those 2 chapters, and it's pretty thick reading, but it's all plain spoken. So he gives you a good philosophical education. But like I said, it takes some preparation. You really shouldn't be afraid to take those steps to prepare. But yeah, it's work. There's no royal road to knowledge, as Hegel says. And actually, it wasn't Hegel. It wasn't Marx who said it. It's not Hegel who said it, although they repeated it. I think there was a mathematician, I think it was Euclid, who was asked, Jim, is this correct? Euclid was asked by a king to give him like a too long didn't read version of mathematics. And the guy was like, there's no royal road with this. You have to go through the process in order to get down all of the axioms, all of the angles, A to C to D, all of those things. I have a copy here somewhere, actually, like a Dover double volume of Euclid's stuff.
I've been reading also a book on like memory and how you learn and stuff. And it's like, yeah, you can either do rote memorization, which just kind of gives you're forcing it, or you can take the slow time to actually learn it in a more natural way.
The problem with our brains is over time, plasticity, over time, changing plasticity in your brain overwrites old information. So rote's good for developing a good working knowledge, but then you actually have to use that working knowledge consistently, or it's going to disappear. That's what it does. That's just how the brain works. And don't be afraid to retake courses, reread old books that you thought you read years ago and you thought you mastered, because chances are, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And that's the last cliche I'm going to leave with our audience tonight. You can turn off YouTube, Kyle. Have a good night, folks. Those watching.
For those who celebrate. All right, have a good evening.
Yeah. Our 100th YouTube video. I've never counted them actually.